one of the things that's happening technologically is we are coming closer and closer to sort of the Star Trek replicator, where we've got a machine that just makes anything, right? Like it's easier to buy cheap things now than it ever has been in human history. Most people can buy those things in the United States of America. The number of people who are in extreme poverty by any global standard in the United States is below 2%. The vast majority of people in the United States by global standards are upper class and above, middle to upper class and above by global standards, not American standards, by global standards. And so we're reaching the point where prosperity, at least in any sort of absolute sense historically, has grown to magnificent proportions. I mean, the person who's middle class now is living better than the person who was unbelievably wealthy in 1880 who's still going outside to pee.
By material standards.
By material standards. But this is the real problem, is that UBI doesn't solve the biggest problem of all, I think, which is, you sort of mentioned it, but the need for human fulfillment is not going to be filled by a government check or by a redistribution of income. And people, so far we've filled that, for most of human history, we filled that with work. That the idea was that we don't have a lot to do today, but we have to go and we have to work because otherwise we're going to starve. And that's what fills our days. What fills our days is that we go and sure, I'm doing a repetitive task at the factory, but that's what earns me the money so I can come home and take care of my kids and make a better life for them.
And let's expand that slightly to not only include work for money, but also kin work, particularly, which has been the province more of women than of men, which has been a vital part of work, which needs to be recognized, often happens off market.
No, that's exactly right.
Right.
One of the things that's happening is in the materialist, almost Marxist perspective of whatever's in your bank account is your measure of value. And that's why, if you don't have enough in your bank account, then obviously the system has somehow screwed you. The reality is that we are concerned with these systemic problems and we should focus on these systemic problems, but the great majority of unhappiness, I think, that's occurring in modern American society, and I think in the West particularly, which is historically prosperous, is a poverty of values, a poverty of meaning, a poverty of purpose. And I'm not sure that can be filled. People are trying to fill that with political action. Instead of trying to look at their own lives and say, what can I do to make myself better? And if I were on a desert island, what would I do to make myself a better person? Just me and my family, what would I do? Other than going and chopping down trees or grabbing a coconut. We're so focused on either how we rail against the system, which sometimes deserves railing against, but we spend all of our time worrying about how to rail against the system. And that, I think, makes us susceptible to politicians who lie to us about these very simplistic
Well, I agree
situations.
with that, Ben, but I also think that one of the things that we have to do a better job on is, just as I have to defend, coming from a left of center perspective, the right of people who have contributed extraordinary levels to all of us to retain extraordinary reward. I think it's hyper important for the right to acknowledge that a lot of the reward that has occurred has come from non-productive activities through rent seeking. So if some meeting takes place in an investment bank, which allows them to privatize gains and socialize whatever security is necessary to keep those banks afloat, and I wasn't party to that, that's going to make me livid and furious when it reorders the social order.
No, we fully agree on this. I mean, when it comes to this is
why we have to model this.
Well, the Tea Party and the Occupy were on the same side of this particular battle. Our problem with Occupy, I was a Tea Partier. Our problem with Occupy was not their argument that the big banks were in bed with the government. It's, why are you protesting at the big banks? Go protest at the government, right? The big banks are not elected. At least the people in the government are elected. You want to shatter that paradigm, you're actually going to have to go after elected officials as opposed to yelling at bankers who don't give a crap as they drive away in their Mercedes.
Yeah, I'm actually more upset about the people who, both left and right, refuse to talk about the problem of rent seeking. So I believe there was a speech that Hillary Clinton gave at some point, if I'm not mistaken, where she said, come on, we all created the great financial crisis. And I thought, no, we really didn't all create the great financial crisis. And whether that is the heads of investment banks or politicians or the rating agencies, whatever it is, we did not return costs in an appropriate fashion. And that is the problem why there's such a loss of trust. When we had the savings and loan scandal, when you have situations where people go to jail, when people do jail time for bad deeds, you have a public trust that people can see that the high and mighty can be laid low. What was astounding, and this is one of the things where I learned to distrust the New York Times, is I appeared in an article called "They Tried to Outsmart Wall Street," which tried to make the case that it was not the investment bankers, but the quants who came from mathematics and physics who caused the crisis. When from my perspective, we were the guys who tried to sound the alarm and say, hey, the models are out of control and this is nuts, and nobody listened to us. So it's very important to realize that the media gets into the act, the regulators, the ratings agencies, the politicians. There's this entire industry of people that ordinary Americans do not understand, cannot fathom, that is allowing rent seeking to undermine the basis of wealth. And it's important that wealth be something we can understand. I always watch Jackie Chan when he does a reel of the stunts in his film that didn't go well, and he slides down, live electrical wire and breaks through glass. And I think there's no way in the world I want to tax this guy at a high level and take his money, because I know exactly why he got paid, because I would never do anything like that. I want to be able to point to fortunes and say, I know what this person created, and thank you. And it's very important that we restore confidence that rent seeking is not the primary modality by which wealth is created through transfer.